I'm very happy that I can welcome you in those beautiful spaces on our conference, which is dedicated to Václav Havel, his legacy, his ideas about Europe.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really very pleased and honored to be here today. Not because of my recent capacity of Deputy Foreign Minister, but mainly because I have a huge respect and a lot of memories connected to then President Václav Havel. I have this honor to meet him even long time before he became to be a president, and also I spent once 48 hours in detention just because there was a risk that Czechoslovak policy, communist policy, decided to protect me not to attend an anti-socialist event which might be organized by Václav Havel. So my connection to this personality is pretty long, and that's why I'm so happy to be here today and to share with you some kind of views. And I was preparing for this conference and thinking about Václav Havel's legacy. The slogan "Europe as a task," which has became the motto of the Czech presidency, came to my mind as a clear example of Václav Havel's legacy I would like to share with you today. In 1996, Václav Havel was invited to Aachen, Germany, to speak at the oldest and best-known Charlemagne Prize ceremony, awarded for work done in the service of European unification. Václav Havel himself had received the prize in 1991. The prize has been given to many world political leaders, most recently to a trio of Belarusian dissidents. From Czechia, only Václav Havel has received it so far. In his speech, Václav Havel reflected on the future of Europe and concluded that Europe is above all a task for us. We, Czechs, feel it as a strong part of his legacy. Therefore, no better slogan could be chosen for the Czech presidency this time. As this speech by Václav Havel was a remarkable summary of his view of Europe in the mid-90s, allow me to recall it today in the current new geopolitical context in a more extensive way. Quote, "Today, Europe no longer decides what happens to the world," Václav Havel stressed in the speech. Now, he said, Europe should stop and think about itself. In his view, Europe has never had a better opportunity for a kind of reassembly. According to Václav Havel, Europe is a collection of countries that did not go through communism, and most of which are now members of the European Union. It therefore means the part of Europe which is relatively politically stable because it has had the opportunity to cultivate a democratic political system and civil society for decades, which is economically prosperous and which has been integrating itself gradually into large political and economic union for decades. It's certainly a Europe that is attractive and desirable to all others. And it is no coincidence that many countries that not belong to it are tired of the slogan of returning to Europe, which basically means being accepted into the club of countries historically happier for having been on the other side of the Iron Curtain, continued Václav Havel. How typical of our days, isn't it? However, there is another Václav Havel definition of Europe. This Europe is a shared destiny, a common complicated history, shared values, a common culture of life. But not only that, it is also a certain extent, a space of certain will, certain behavior, and certain responsibility, thanks to which the borders of this Europe can sometimes be quite blurred and changeable, described Václav Havel. These Václav Havel's words and views may be also perceived as an inspiration for the Eastern Partnership. When launching this policy back in 2009, during the first Czech EU presidency, we wanted to offer our friends in the East an alternative. We wanted them not to feel abandoned in one imperial sphere of influence. Our aim was to acknowledge that they matter for Europe, that each of them may freely choose the level of cooperation with the European Union, that they can make their own geopolitical choice. Moreover, I'm both proud and happy that the three most advanced partner countries, that is Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine, have not only been acknowledged the European perspective, but also considerably approached or even received the status of candidate countries. I know it's a little bit sensitive. Having its own experience from the intensive and demanding process of European integration, Czechia warmly welcomed the historic decision to grant candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova and European perspective to Georgia, which had been continuously calling for. It was a historical milestone and we should keep maintaining the momentum. We will continue to support the associated countries throughout all stages of their accession journey. It is apparent that the path to the full EU membership will be neither easy nor quick. It's important to make progress in the areas of rule of law, democracy, and especially overcoming political polarization. That is the key for moving forwards and demonstrate the will and commitment to share the responsibility, values, and behavior. Václav Havel stressed that Europe is a unified and invisible political entity, which, although diverse, forms a single spiritual space and civilization circle. Therefore, Georgia should concentrate on full implementation of the relevant reforms. First and foremost, it is essential for Georgia to work on meeting the 12 conditions set by the European Commission in order to receive the candidate status. Nevertheless, it's necessary to stress that progress in a reform agenda will be rewarded with moving forward towards this ultimate goal, and that it will have positive impact on the lives of the citizens of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, and on the general well-being of these countries. In the meantime, it is important to continue working on further economic integration and association in other key areas in order to strengthen the ties between the EU and the associated partners. The great European tradition, according to Václav Havel, is the idea of the free citizen as the source of all power. The unification of EU, he said, was a great renaissance of the civic principle that would counter the fanatical nationalism that unleashed two world wars. It is a paradox, he says, but the unification of Europe is not a restriction of freedom, but is deepening of it. It is a process of deepening this freedom, not only in the sense that man is freed from the fear and others, but also in the sense that more and more space is opened up for his civic self-realization, he said, of European integration. Europe, he said, will no longer export its inventions and its power. Nevertheless, it could benefit the world in another way. By its example, Europe can show that it is possible to coexist peacefully with other cultural worlds without having to renounce oneself on the one's truth, he said. That is what makes Václav Havel's legacy unexpectedly typical for all of us. So let me wish you and your conference and seminar a lot of success and interesting debate. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody. First of all, I want to say how great honor it is for me to be here with you and greet you on the very first introductory panel. Because Václav Havel is a very important person, and I don't represent president or I don't represent any official organization, so out of all Georgian professors or intellectuals, I was chosen to have this honor. So I want to thank very much Ivana and organizers of this conference for giving me this opportunity. Why it happened, I guess there is some linkage to the fact that I happen to be probably the first publisher of Václav Havel in Georgia. In 1992, I and my friend, we founded the Caucasus Institute for Peace, Democracy and Development, which was probably the first kind of democracy think tank in Georgia. We got some support from National Endowment for Democracy, and in that very first grant, that first support, we used to publish some books that we considered especially important for democracy. So this included a collection called Classical Documents of Democracy, like starting from Magna Carta and Declaration of Rights of Human Being and Citizen, and the American Declaration of Independence. So these kind of very basic and important documents. We published Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws, and we also published Václav Havel's Power of the Powerless. You can imagine how that we considered this book. So it was one of the first products of our activities, publishing this book. So this shows that we considered Václav Havel very important person and this text very important text. And this happened in 1993, but this is actually, I brought this book with me, it is actually second edition, second printing in 2003. So not so many books published by NGOs are called second printing, so that one was really important. That fact, that recollection, I used to ask a question to myself, why is Václav Havel so important? What sets him apart from other people? So Václav Havel, although he is a very important person, but he is not that much known in Georgia, so having a student audience, I feel more like a professor who has to also give some introduction to who Václav Havel was and why he was such a special person. And Václav Havel had many kind of hypostases, as it were, many expressions of his talent. First of all, he is a very important writer and playwright, and I know that at least one of his plays were staged in Georgia, in Tbilisi, in Marjanishvili theater, so it was also an interesting play, and that in itself makes him an important author. But of course he made his name also as a dissident. As a dissident meant a person who publicly opposed the communist regimes. And that was of course very, very difficult thing, so it required lots of courage, moral courage to do so. Now we cannot say that in today's Georgia it's 100% safe to oppose government, sometimes it's not, but of course we cannot compare with conditions of communist country. So opposing a communist country in public meant readiness to go to jail, lose your job, and many, many bad things. And so there were not so many people who dared that. In Georgia, I think maybe there were under 10 who really dared to do this. So costs were very high, and everywhere there were only few people who thought that this is necessary, and to demonstrate this resistance to the communist regime. So that was very important. Also after Czechoslovakia first and then Czechia as an independent country became a democratic country. Václav Havel was for a long time president of the Czech Republic, and it was very difficult transition. There were, very few of dissidents who made it to politics, who became political leaders, and often these transitions were very, very difficult ones. So it's one thing to oppose, to criticize, to be courageous, but politics requires different kind of skill set, as it were. And many people, some people at least, who gained great moral credit for being dissidents, were not were to some extent maybe discredited even after joining this very controversial field of politics. And Václav Havel, so being a hero is one thing, which Václav Havel was, of course, but being a political leader is very different thing. And Václav Havel is quite unique in a way that he was a political leader, he was president, but somehow this did not discredit him, basically, in any way. Of course, I guess he had his fair share of political controversy. You cannot be a politician without that, and he was often criticized, maybe fairly. I am not a judge to that, but at least now, when we, under we mean people who have lived under communism and now want to live and try to live in democratic societies. For this community of people, Václav Havel has become a symbol, very important symbol of commitment to democratic values. And that's kind of third expression of Václav Havel. But in addition to that, last but not least, I left it intentionally to that, he was also important intellectual. He was, and here comes this book, The Power of the Powerless, which was first published in 1977. And this book, and even the title of this book, which is very impressive in itself, if you only read the title and analyze and understand the title, is very important, because it really shows outlines the scene in which people may fight dictatorships and, most importantly, overcome dictatorships. And one should remind that, 1977 was very important, very different from, for instance, 1989, when there was this great kind of peaceful revolutions, and Czechs, of course, invented brand of velvet revolution, which we also tried to follow, and quite a few other countries. On the hindsight, it appears that, communism, it was ineffective, it was somehow doomed to be defeated, but it did not look like that at all in 1977. I assure you that communist system looked rock solid, basically. And of course, it was still less than 9 years, less than 10 years had passed from Prague Spring, so-called Prague Springs, which was an attempt, not even an attempt of democratization, but attempt of liberalizing and softening communist regime by communist leadership of Czechoslovakia at that time. So there was this popular concept of socialism with human face, which implied, of course, that real socialism had a sort of beastly face, not really a human one. But even that quite tame attempt, if we look from today's perspective, to soften and humanize communism was brutally crushed by tanks. So we now speak about, of course, Ukraine and heroic resistance to Ukraine, which is also successful, which is not just heroic but successful. That's most important. But in 1968, it was the South Soviet tanks that were successful. They did crush this attempt to humanize socialism, and this kind of protest from them, for that, gave rise to this dissident movement in Czechoslovakia. So it became clear that just reforming communism from within may be not so promising idea, so you need to openly and clearly oppose it. But at that time it was seen as, you know, how to oppose it when it is so strong. What can a playwright do, or what can ordinary citizen do when Communist Party controls everything? And even if some communists decide to be a little bit softer, tanks come and these communists are even are in trouble. So what can be done? And I think most important and central idea of this book, which is also very important for our society today, I believe, is exactly as it is expressed in this title, The Power of the Powerless. Yes, facing dictatorship, we may feel powerless. We may feel, but what can we do? Because they have all the resources. They have tanks, they have money, they have media, they have everything, and we are just, you know, who we are. And this maybe used this feeling, which is not fully ungrounded, of course, because there is very big power differential, as one would say, between autocratic regime and dictatorship and people, human beings, but this differential in so hard power, as it were, to use this popular term of political science, may be offset by what we now call soft power. Of course, at that time, it was not, this term had not been invented yet, but it's moral power. So yes, there are so many advantages that communist regimes had, but what they did not have was moral power. Moral power was on the side of people who believed in something. And also, I don't want to really give a long lecture, and I know you want to ask questions and have some debate, but I think for what Havel does in this book, and I recommend, of course, reading it to students and young people, he shows the nature of dictatorships, how the dictatorships work, why they are stable, and then why they are defeated in the end. Of course, Havel could not foresee 1989, but in a way he did by his book, that dictatorship is never based only on repression. Repression, of course, when we think about dictatorships, we first of all remember repression and repressive methods, punishment, this kind of thing. Maybe now we also speak about bribery and vote buying or other methods. Methodology changes, of course, but still it's about resources that power has and people don't have. So this power in direct sense, so people are afraid that maybe they're afraid of losing a job, maybe they're afraid of this or that, and this fear which this power instills is the main tool of dictators. And that's true, that's not wrong, but Václav Havel somehow changes focus on discussion, that while this is true, the main kind of basis of dictatorial power is this conformism of the people. And this conformism is based on passivities. Already in 1970s, neither in Czechoslovakia nor in Georgia, almost nobody believed in communism guiding ideology, right? So in my generation, I studied philosophy in philosophy department, and I only had one professor who was really a Marxist. So there were first real young Marxists whom I met were coming from Germany. There were no young Marxists in Georgia. Now there are, but at that time there were no Marxists. So nobody believed in ideology, but still people were obedient to the regime because, okay, you know, okay, what can we do and why should we risk anything? I mean, he has, of course, this very famous example of a grocer, small trader who put some kind of like Slava KPSS or some communist slogan, which was at that time necessary for you know, widespread. So that glory to communism, something like that. So did he believe in communism? No. Did anybody kind of force him to have this slogan in his grocery store? No. But it was just in case, you know. I just show my loyalty, and I should be forthcoming in showing my loyalty. And communism as a repressive regime is based not really on ideology because nobody believes in it anymore. It is based partly on repression, of course, but ultimately it is based by conformism of these people. And so if we overcome that conformism and overcome that fear and overcome some kind of mythologizing power that they can do everything. No, they cannot do everything. They have their own resources, of course, but they are really weak vis-a-vis the people if the people kind of awakens. And so that was confirmed in a way, in the way communism did crumble, was crashed, because once somehow people, for whatever reason, decided that, okay, enough is enough, and we have to do something. Okay, the very rock-solid communist system was destroyed in a matter of months. And all Sovietologists in University of California or in Glasgow or whatever were left speechless because nobody could predict that, because nobody understood properly this power of the powerless, and Václav Havel did. So, and because, okay, we certainly are not in the communist-style dictatorship in Georgia, but, okay, we are not in a democracy either, unfortunately, after 30 years, also after having published this book. I think this concept of power of the powerless, that however we think that, okay, somebody has so much money and this and that and what we can do, which is also very widespread and popular in Georgia, I think that situation, I think this book is applicable also to our today's practice. So I think this book is alive and continues to be very important. So I recommend it very much, and I think Václav Havel is not only important as a dissident who opposed that kind of dictatorship, but he is a source of inspiration continues to be source of inspiration for everybody who cares for liberty and democracy. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, Deputy Ministers, dear colleagues, thank you so much for the invitation to speak here today. I'm really sorry I can't join you in person. But first of all, I must start by condemning in the strongest possible terms Russia's illegal, unjustified invasion of Ukraine. As President von der Leyen underlined in the recent Berlin summit, the European Union stands firmly with Ukraine and its people. Together with our member states, we've already mobilized over 19 billion euros of support for Ukraine. And in Berlin, President von der Leyen made it clear that the European Union will provide a further 18 billion euros next year. In June, the European Council granted Ukraine and Moldova candidate status and granted Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia a European perspective, This is a really historic development for these three countries and for all the people of these three countries. The European Council has also made it clear that there's a number of steps that need to be performed. So I'd like to congratulate them on their historic achievements, and the future of these countries and their citizens lies firmly within the European Union. On our side, we will do everything possible to support you on your European path. A lot of hard work lies ahead. Key steps and priorities have been outlined clearly for each country, which include much needed progress in the fields of rule of law and the justice reform, protection of human rights and minorities, and strengthening the independence and effectiveness of state institutions. It's important now for Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia to move forward with these much needed reforms, which will, alongside bringing them closer to the European Union, above all bring tangible benefits for citizens of Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine. In terms of the timeline, as you know, progress along the path towards the European Union is based on merits. This depends on the speed of reform in each country. The next step, we will publish an additional report on the degree of implementation of the European Union body of law, what we call the acquis, in each of the three countries. This will set out the level of alignment, make a clear benchmark for future regular reporting, and identify areas where additional efforts are needed. Following that, next year, the enlargement package, probably in autumn 2023, will include not only the Western Balkans and Turkey, but also reports on Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia. In the meantime, of course, we will continue to help bring Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia closer to the European Union. We'll do this notably by continuing to walk towards the full implementation of the association agreements and the deep and comprehensive free trade areas. We will also be investing substantially in the economies through the Economic and Investment Plan. These plans can help the entire region build back better, boost economic recovery, and accelerate the green and digital transitions. Since the adoption of the Economic and Investment Plan just over a year ago, over 2.5 billion euros has already been mobilized. And over the forthcoming years, we expect to leverage up to 17 billion euros with a public investment of 2.3 billion euros. We're also looking to accelerate Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia's participation in a wide range of European Union programs and agencies. Let me conclude by assuring you we will do everything we can to support Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia on their European path. Thank you.
I will be speaking about the implementation of the European Union's 12 priorities for Georgia, which was set out last June and represents the compass of the roadmap for Georgia to achieve the candidate status. As Professor Nadia said, I represent the governing party, Georgian Green, and also I represent our faction in the parliament. So, therefore, I will not delve into a large analysis, so to speak, broad analysis, and we can speak about that later if need be. What I will do, though, is be very specific about what the governing party and the parliament does to fulfill the preconditions set by the European Union. And I believe once we are talking about the European Union, that fits the profile of the institution, which always talks about the norms, rules, and procedures. In the beginning of July, only a week after the EU Commission's recommendations, the Parliament of Georgia launched a follow-up process with respect to the 12 priorities, and we set out a strategic plan for its implementation. As you know, the initial political deadline for that implementation was end of 2022. But then, as Mr. Meredith mentioned, this deadline was somewhat moved to probably autumn 2023, and it will be, and Georgia's case will be assessed in conjunction with other aspiring countries, mostly candidates such as the Western Balkans, and of course Ukraine and Moldova. But nonetheless, because the assessment process, the first sort of assessment attempt by the European Union will be made sometime in March, and they normally start gathering the evidence for progress a few months ahead. Then we decided to be as forceful and proactive in our endeavor as possible. So therefore we started meetings with the opposition parties, which was spearheaded by the Speaker of Parliament, as well as with the Georgian National Platform of Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, which is a major non-governmental organization or civil society forum that addresses Georgia's European integration within the Eastern Partnership Forum. So the process was organized in three ways. The first, of course, is the top level is the plenary session when Parliament decides what to do about the European priorities. Second is parliamentary committees, which is a usual working format. And the third, which we created on top of the other two constitutional formats, is the parliamentary working groups, so that will allow civil society organizations to have a greater say in the discussion. So these are three levels of discussion, so to speak. And we arranged that discussion along two major principles. The first is that we are taking a legal approach. It's a procedural, normative approach to European priorities. And the second is that we would conduct these reforms according to best European practices only. In other words, we would probably refrain from any improvisation that doesn't conform to the best European practice. So 9 parliamentary working groups were created to work on specific priorities, and they would assess the state of play in each area of these 12 priorities. In fact, these 12 preconditions or priorities are more than 12 because each of them includes some secondary, some of them are split in different clauses. So at first stage, the working group would assess the situation, where we are, and then propose the amendments and the changes that would move Georgia along. So the crucial political component is participation of the political opposition. So what happened in this case, 5 political groups started participating in these working sessions, and 3 other groups, that is UNM, United National Movement, the major opposition party, LELO, and Strategia Machiavelli, and for our foreign friends, essentially these 3 groups represent formally different parties, but represent the United National Movement writ large, so to speak. These groups declared they wouldn't participate, but at the same time they sporadically still take part in some discussions, and sometimes even vote along the governing party when it comes to the plenary sessions. So I'll just very quickly go through the crucial elements of the priorities and see where we are with respect of their fulfillment. The first and the most important probably from the EU perspective is the depolarization. If I may, maybe if you don't mind closing the door because it sort of interferes, unless you suffocate. Thank you. So the first is political polarization. We decided to go along three principles there. The first is language. There was a brilliant article by Professor Stephen Jones, who is currently at Harvard University, who wrote how language, deterioration of language, impacts in a negative way on democracy. So we decided to approach that in a way that to moderate the language and create a platform inside the parliament which would encourage political parties to use less hate speech and be more cooperative. Second was inclusiveness of all political parties and civil society groups. And the third, implicit in the depolarization debate, is an attempt to move the debate from politically pernicious issues to substantive debates. I've actually, because the polarization is such a big issue, I have returned this morning from Strasbourg, where I took part in the World Forum for Democracy, and actually presented on this very topic. And the title of the panel was Depolarization, Polarization and Persuasion. And I'll briefly tell you what I said. In the first place, in Georgia, there is, as yet, no case of so-called pernicious polarization, when the society is divided. Actually, we have this in the United States, in a couple of other countries, not couple, but quite a few other countries. In Georgia, you have polarization mostly in the political class rather than wider society. However, this doesn't mean that we can keep things going this way forever, because effectively, there is a danger that this political class polarization will translate into societal polarization. Therefore, the only way out to avoid the breakdown of our democracy is to reverse polarization. And for that, so far, the two ways to do that is, as we noticed so far, is to bring the debate to the institutions. You remember those Georgian participants who are present, that for about 6 or 7 months, the parliament was boycotted or sabotaged by the radical opposition. And that is when our polarization probably hit its bottom. But as soon as they moved to the parliament, after some time, and we see this and we feel it, now the debate is much more civic than it was when the processes played out in the streets. And the second is about shifting the paradigm, so to speak, of debates. We have to move from these personalistic, hate speech-based controversy between us to the issues that our public is interested in. And if we manage to shift that debate, then I think polarization will ease itself naturally. Anyway, because I have already spoken for most of my allocated time, I will very briefly go through the priorities. The first one was polarization, as I said. The second one was better functioning, guarantee the full functioning of all state institutions. And for that, our major focus is improved parliamentary oversight mechanisms, including legislative changes, so that the parliamentary control, including opposition control, over the executive is increased. The next one is the working group on the revision of the election code. And here we have actually a tangible progress. We decided to introduce near fully electronic election system for 2024 elections. And that electronic voting system will cover about 70% of the population, which automatically excludes either fraud or the claims to the fraud within even the first minutes when the voting stops. And we believe this is a major improvement on the electoral system. Judicial reform is one of the issues that is paramount, not so much among the Georgian politicians as between the European Union and Georgia. And for that we decided to work into the state of play, develop a strategy and adopt it. And part of it is a very important aspect. And of course, we are sending all the amendments and draft laws that will work out between ourselves to the OSCE ODIHR and the Venice Commission, which is a major legal watchdog over the process. And also, interestingly enough, we adopted a new law on how to elect the Prosecutor General. It was remarkable that in the Parliament, if I remember correctly, 126 members voted out of 128, which is a phenomenal case for the Georgian Parliament, and probably a major sign that we can actually work together when there is a political will. So the next one is Anti-Corruption Agency, which we created. One of the most hotly debated issues is de-oligarchization. And here we decided to adopt the already existing practice of the Ukrainian law on de-oligarchization, which is actually a very good and functional law when you look at it. And we decided that since it was already approved politically in the West, including by Ursula von der Leyen, to take it and adapt it almost verbatim to our situation. Then there are some institutional changes with respect to the fight against organized crime. Actually, there is little that Parliament can do with respect to media freedom, which is priority 7 to 8, except for monitoring and exercising control over the controversial political issues that pertain to media freedom. But also we are now working on the new edition or amendments to the law on broadcasting in Georgia, which also, as I said in the beginning, will be among the best European practice. There are also some significant steps in direction of gender equality, and as member of Gender Council in the Parliament, I could speak about it in more detail, but probably later on, if there is interest. And finally, the other issues were the involvement of civil society, which largely was achieved through the working group process. Georgian courts to proactively consider ECHR judgments. And finally, the nomination of the public defender, which is underway with active participation from the opposition. So I hope I didn't bore you with these details about it, but I think it's important to recap the political baseline, where we are with respect to the fulfilling of the EU recommendations. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon. Let me express my sincere gratitude to the Czech presidency for organizing such an interesting conference. It's an honor for me to participate as a speaker in this event. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their interesting presentations and deliberations. In rapidly changing geopolitical reality with seriously shaken security architecture of Europe, we need to make inevitable policy adjustments to our cooperation formats. New decisions should be based on a clear understanding of the strategic reason for the Eastern Partnership in the Eastern European region. The EU should maximize its efforts to export sustainable peace learning in order to safeguard long-lasting stability and unhindered peaceful development of the entire region. This clearly influences the future configuration and purpose of the Eastern Partnership as well. The EAP has definitely played a very positive role in ensuring Eastern Partners' political association and economic integration with the EU according to the will and readiness of the partners, and in the frames of the political mandate given to this policy initiative during the last 30 years. In a dramatically changed geopolitical environment after Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, EAP partners Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine have applied for the EU membership and are pursuing their EU integration goals already under the EU enlargement package. We do realize that it is still beneficial for the EU and the Eastern partners to maintain a common policy framework of the EAP in order to secure and further expand bonds that have already been built, and also to ensure EU's meaningful, tangible engagement. On the other hand, it's essential to maintain EAP's relevance, which is only possible with applying even more differentiation and develop tailor-made projects. We believe that we should focus more on security cooperation schemes, whether it's soft or hard security, efforts aimed at countering hybrid threats and disinformation, deepening cooperation between us. Another crucial dimension which we advocate within the EAP is connectivity. It represents a common interest in this highly vulnerable at the same time interdependent environment. In Georgia's case, it first and foremost concerns transport, energy and digital connectivity through the Black Sea. Several high-profile flagship projects under the EAP Economic and Investment Plan are now in the pipeline, such as the construction of high-voltage electricity transmission cable line and the fiber optic cable, both to be laid on the Black Sea, as well across the Black Sea for improved physical connectivity. These projects bear special value not only for Georgia and the EU, but the whole region by extending potential for developing renewable energy sources. We continue to benefit from the goals that we have set together within the EAP, which we are now in the process of materializing. For instance, we have recently applied for the Single Euro Payments Area, SEPA, after some serious financial adjustments and reforms carried out in Tbilisi. We hope will be concluded soon, and our citizens will enjoy all benefits of being a member of SEPA. So overall, we are ready to continue our constructive engagement within the EAP and contribute to its successful functioning as a pragmatic framework for enhancing all the region towards security threats and for promoting better connectivity with the EU. We hope that the EAP will serve as a pragmatic mechanism to ensure Black Sea connectivity within the broader connectivity domain of the Caspian Sea, Black Sea, Mediterranean Sea, Adriatic Sea, and facilitate the implementation of more energy transport and digital infrastructure projects. A realistic prospect of the EU membership is a strong motivation for us and for Georgian citizens. The EU-Georgia Association Council held in September in Brussels reaffirmed Georgia's European perspective. We are determined to swiftly progress on the EU accession path. The candidate status is our next immediate milestone, and we expect that soon the Georgian people will celebrate this achievement. To this end, an inclusive process to implement our priorities is well underway. Minister will explain all this process to you. In parallel, we continue successful implementation of the AA, DCFTA, and the new association agenda for 21-27. Which reflects ambitious goals and addresses all key issues on our common agenda. It's our intention to exploit full potential of the AA-DCFTA in order to achieve full integration into the EU single market. For the moment, Georgia already has implemented almost 50% of the AA commitments, which is proved by higher degree of legal and institutional approximation with the EU standards. EU assistance also plays a very important role in Georgia's reform process and success stories. We hope that pre-accession instrument, so-called IPA, will be extended to Georgia as well to Moldova and Ukraine as a logical step demonstrating strong political support for the EU perspective of our three countries. Under the financial framework, Georgia has demonstrated one of the highest absorption capacity of the EU financial assistance, including under the EU budgetary support. Important work has continued in terms of the planning and implementation of projects under the EU institution building tool, twinning. 40 twinning projects already have been successfully completed, and 13 projects are ongoing. Building on the successful experience with EU framework programs such as Erasmus+, Horizon 2020 and Creative Europe, operating under multi-annual financial framework. Georgia has expressed its interest in terms of the continuation of its participation in the programs. And some words also I'd like to mention Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, so-called association trio cooperation. The trio format has played already a positive role in the past, and we express readiness to continue close coordination among the trio for the following reasons. It's value-based cooperation format guided by the common European choice. And this format can provide a strong regional context, which always welcomed in the European Union, including in terms of enlargement. The Western Balkans regional dimension of the enlargement policy is a good example. And also I would like to mention that we launched a special cooperation program with the Western Balkan countries. Our ministry representatives already visited almost all Western Balkan countries during the last month. The complex context of the Eastern European region is equally critical for all us three countries, causing existential risks to our societies. All of us try to free ourselves from the Russian influence and are paying high price for this over during last years. Geopolitical context worsens or improves depending on what kind of support and political signaling we receive from the EU. Together we have more chance to counterweight geopolitical threats and induce the European Union in strategic importance of our countries for broader peace and sustainable security. Thank you very much.
For your words before I will come back to the topic of today's discussion, I would like to express my deepest appreciations for the higher educational establishments of Georgia, for all Georgian students, for the young generation who demonstrated their strong will and support and attitude towards support of Ukraine at the most difficult period of time. I know that many of you were present in Rustaveli, where the full-fledged war started. I know that you collected with different educational establishment of Georgia humanitarian assistance and transmitted to Ukraine. And I would like to thank you for that, and I would like to tell you that your each personal position and personal view matters a lot. And for me, your presence today, when we're discussing the future of Europe and our future Ukraine's and Georgia aspirations, is the best proof of Georgia's willingness to join the EU. Not to join the Russia and not to trade with Russia, but the joy of the European families to which both Ukraine and Georgia are. Coming back to the topic of the conference and talking about the Václav Havel, I would like to mention, of course, that this individual, these right politicians in Ukraine, he remains as a symbol of extraordinary politicians. The extraordinary politicians with his open mind, with his conscience, with his dignity. He maintained a very close ties with Ukrainian dissidents, especially with the movement of human rights movement, and during the Orange Revolution, and cited the democracy and the free choice of the free Ukrainian citizens. Until the last days of his life, Havel supported the countries of former socialist camp in their desire to build democratic states, while often mentioning Ukraine. On the days of his 17th birthday, he received Ukraine's highest award, the Order of Yaroslav the Wise. And I would like to quote the words of Václav Havel on this occasion. I deeply appreciate this highest Ukrainian award and want to note that from very beginning I supported the Orange Revolution and the transition to a democratic system in Ukraine. Despite the fact that I am no longer the president of the Czech Republic, I will remain a friend of Ukraine and I am always ready to support this country in case of the need. End of the quote. Ukraine's European integration is on the way since Ukraine's independence in 1991, and with the adoption by the Parliament of Ukraine, the Konala of Ukraine, the resolution of the main directors of Ukraine's foreign policy, which in 1993 legislated the goal of EU and NATO membership among the key priorities of the Ukrainian state. Unlike Russia, which has always sought dominance and compelled its neighbors to join its artificial overstate entities by force, threat, and blackmail, the EU has always attracted countries by its basic principles of democratic developments, respect of each of its members, and acted as an integration center of gravity not only for its neighbors. And that is why, from the first day of independence, the choice of Ukraine was unambiguous and irreversible. Our people go there where freedom and liberty is. Russia's large-scale aggression against Ukraine has clearly confirmed the fallacy of the previous approach. That it is possible to negotiate with Russia and ignore geopolitical threats for the sake of economic benefits. Speaking of candidates for EU membership, we should understand that the EU candidate states today will become the members of the completely different European Union, which is currently changing dynamically and drastically under the influence of the large-scale armed aggression of Russia against Ukraine. And Ukraine will bring new qualities to this new union that everyone needs. Indomitable will to win, the ability of our armed forces to resist the overwhelming enemy, which was in the past considered so-called second army in the world, the unity of the Ukrainian people and their loyalty to European values, confirmed by the willingness to sacrifice on independence back in 2013. The readiness of the Ukraine to contribute in practical means to the strengthening of the EU common foreign and security policy, to protect the EU member states from our common aggressor, the Russian Federation. However, understanding alone is not enough to respond effectively to the new challenges of civilization. And nowadays, Ukrainian missions is to encourage the European Union to respond adequately, to respond quickly, and to react preventively. The modern realities of the civilizational war waged by Ukraine in the interest not only of Europe but also of all progressive humanity bring to the first place such pragmatic issues as preserving civilization, because otherwise there will be no one to integrate with, it will be no one integrations, it will be no one international organizations where we can step in. That is why the priority now is the unity and cohesion of Europe around helping Ukraine to win this war and ensure lasting peace in the interest of the development of the world civilization. And this assistance is not limited to economic, military and humanitarian support, but includes the involvement of all in strong sanctions against the aggressor country, strengthening the total isolation of Russia. It must be understood that the losses that each country can suffer are insignificant compared to the cost of the victory or loss of the entire civilized world in this war. And now we are inspired by the positive decision of the European Council, the unity of the Ukrainian nation, the full support of the Ukrainian people for the fundamental values, rights and freedoms underlying the Western world, the selfless sacrifice of the Ukrainian people on the altar of their European future, as well as the support of governments, parliaments and people of key EU member states. The current war in Ukraine is actually not only the war for freedom and independence, but also Ukraine's war against the scoop, Savok, as a very precise word of the spirit of the Russian era, against the influence of which both Havla and Ukrainian nations, Ukrainian patriots fought peacefully at one time and nowadays are fighting with weapons on the battlefield. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you for the invitation, and I feel privileged to be invited to this occasion and to be part of a Czechs jumping on Georgia, having today Minister and Director for the Development and this conference organized by Czech Centrum and Czech Embassy. So be patient with overall Czech influence. And I have, I would say, three troubles with my presentation here. One is when I see my former boss, for whom I worked as a Czechoslovak president for 1 year and then many years, and follow-ups with all these agendas, I feel his recommendation, do not take yourself too much seriously, which was always Havel's approach with a certain reservation. Second one, I'm nervous, nobody wears headphones here, and I hear only excellent English, so I'm sorry for my poor English. And last but not least, I make my notes in Czech to my computer, so I will do some inconsistent remarks to the topics. So be patient, please, with my definitely least professional presentation. I would like to say a few words to the geopolitics currently following Ukrainian charge d'affaires. Second, about our experience with exercising geopolitical shift. Then our experiences and mostly errors we did in approaching to EU. And then what's our understanding to this animal called European Union? What's our experience? And last but not least, if I manage in time, maybe some lesson learned which might be useful for Georgia. But this is probably out of the time limit. So to the geopolitics. Beyond Ukrainian brave defense, we are very close probably to the another significant geopolitical shift in European neighborhood and Europe. As far as the European neighborhood, this is subject what we talk here about, but another one is that we may see more change. Honestly say, why we have to expect Americans to move more to the Pacific and China, so we will tackle as Europe most of agenda we were used to rely on Americans up till now, and this is going to be a significant change. From this point of view, and I don't want to speak about forthcoming US presidential elections and what may happen, it's simply important message, and partly it's also our experience. We should be do a critical reflection toward the European politics going back to 2008. We were not good enough to react to what happened at that time. The same holds to 2014. I was in Parliament 2013 up to 2017, and we had a big debate how to react to this aggression and seizure of China and following war and Minsk agreement. And I think we were not good enough to persuade our European friends inside the EU to take Russia's threat seriously. Today, the situation is different, which means we need to bring Europe to a much stronger position in terms of defense, security, of even armed forces, commonalities, etc. So you have to understand the geopolitics from this point of view, that we need to bring Europe to a much stronger, competent position from internal capacities, which are related not only to brave Ukraine defense and our help, etc., but it's related to North Africa, African development, Mediterranean, and obvious China too. And this is something where I think we got a new responsibilities, and maybe former or new member states coming from former Warsaw Pact are obliged to bring this perspective into the European Union and strengthen it. There was a mention about Strasbourg in European Parliament. Okay, let's say frankly, European Parliament does not have defense committee. We need to we talk on that, and we have so many chiefs of military, so many chiefs of staff, so many budgets, etc., that we need to bring some integration into this field. So we have a lot of homework to do inside the EU ourselves to make Europe stronger and better performing and be more coherent. Because obviously there's no secret about it that Ukrainian aggression or Russian aggression, it's heavily testing cohesion of Europe in terms of understanding where Europe starts and where Europe ends. The quotation of Havel was proper, but this isn't, by far it wasn't common understanding to the Europe. Second, our experience. We were part of geopolitical transfer from Soviet Union sphere to the Western. And let me say maybe one more remark to the geopolitics. The war is definitely bringing clear division between those being part of the Western effort to defend and help and protect Europe, comparing to this part of the world affiliated to the Russia. I mean, the room between the two is narrowing and is becoming empty. As far as our effort, okay, what we did, we removed Soviet troops from Czechoslovakia and region. We launched regional cooperation to achieve this goal together with Poland and Hungary. And I'm stressing this point here that regional cooperation helped us to bring and offer enlargement of NATO and later EU, the whole region, to overcome division of Europe was not only Czechoslovak or Havel's business, it was complex effort to bring united Europe from the north of Estonia south to Bulgaria. And that was the process. It was not happening from day one day, but Visegrad cooperation of 3 at the beginning, 4 countries later, was an important vehicle and engine to bring this. And obviously it was also lobbying machine for both processes, NATO enlargement as well as later EU. At the same time, the part of geopolitical transfer for Czechoslovakia was tough internal reform, starting with the security, going to the institutions, civil society, legal environment, and all parliamentary democracy, to make ourselves fully compatible to where we wanted to belong, which means NATO and later EU. And internal changes and compatibility was a question of our survival in this process. And part of that was national consensus. We would be able to make it, and nobody would be able to make it, with a divided society, political scene, not cooperating on this effort. As it was mentioned, part of this process was the collapse of Czechoslovakia. And to be honest, part of those forces dividing Czechoslovakia was not complete consensus about the geopolitical shift toward the West. The cost for Slovaks, impact of economic changes, etc. was much higher, socially, in all aspects. And this was what brought nationalism up into Slovakia, and this was what brought bring down Czechoslovakia, and Havel was not strong enough and influential to resist. Obviously, we were lucky enough to make it peacefully, and today we are both countries happy inside European Union. And nobody gossips about former wife, I would say. But we are happy. And that's important. This internal consensus is a source of political, not only legitimacy, election, parliament, but integrity and common will to overcome all what we had to go through. Oh, please, Chairman, then. Now, where were our errors? I will mention one. It's natural to follow benefits coming out from membership. In case of NATO, we were just thinking we want to be more secure. We want to be more safe for future. In terms of European Union, we were looking for better environment, better social standards, higher quality of judicial system and public administration. And we didn't care too much about our benefits, what we are going to bring inside these organizations. But the most important point of view is not, or was not, our benefit, but was perception of our future partners about what we are going to bring in. Which means, are we going to bring more consensus, more strength, more competence, more knowledge, better voting inside? In case of NATO, we entered NATO, and a week after, NATO started air operation against Yugoslavia. And all of a sudden, our government has to give order to our ambassador in NATO to raise hand for bombarding Yugoslavia. All of a sudden, our government was responsible for bringing war. And this is heavy load. This is what you have to keep in mind, that you take all of a sudden burden for the decision of the whole organization. In case of European Union, this is your daily bread. On European Council, in European Parliament, in all hundreds of committees on security, on trade. We are continental Moses, we do not have sea, but in spite of that we need to approve all legislation for sailors, for fisheries, for everything. And we cannot block our partners inside. So their perception is, what are they going to bring to us from the point of view of being part of negotiating, voting, development, okay, and ability to take burden for the whole organization. So this is what I would say and recommend as a lesson learned from our case to the Georgia. Care about your predictability, care about your sustainable resilience under the heavy load. And last but not least, and this is the remark I would like to make, when we talk about European culture and values, we usually talk about education, human rights, legal state, etc. But this is also clean water. This is also waste management. This is also clean environment and quality of your environment. And this is something what even we were asked, first of all, clean wastewater in your cities, build your infrastructure. It was even the most earlier demand we had to face. We had capacity for that to do that. But usually you think about judiciary, about freedoms, about human rights, etc. And you don't think about conditions of your environment, your water, your social cohesion, your healthcare system. Because it is the company of the richest countries in the world. It's a heavy loaded train increasing speed. And this train is not going to slow down, wait for you. You have to jump in full speed. Thank you for your attention.